Welcome to My Psychedelic Roots, a podcast of conversations with people from a broad swath of lived experience to explore their psychedelic beginnings or roots, what led them to start using psychedelics, what those early experiences were like, and how those roots have impacted their life's unfolding. My name is Amy Bartlett, and it is my hope that these stories, generously shared by my guests, offer perspective and insight into the lived reality of psychedelic experiencing. Please feel welcome to subscribe and follow the show to get the latest conversations in your podcast feed. And you are always invited to share this episode with others if you feel inspired. And so, as always, whoever, wherever, and whenever you are, welcome. I'm glad you're here. In this first episode of 2026, I sit down with Dr. Paul Grof, a Canadian research psychiatrist and clinician who has been involved in psychedelic and transpersonal work for over 6 decades. He was a professor at several Canadian and European universities until recently retiring from the University of Toronto in 2022. He also served as an expert at the World Health Organization from 1985 to 2000, where he chaired the Committee on Psychotropic Substances. I know Paul as a friend and active member of the Ottawa community, and it was a real pleasure to get to sit down with him to explore his roots, from growing up in the Czech Republic to being part of the initial wave of people in Western society experimenting with LSD in research labs. In our conversation together, he takes us back to the 1950s and 60s and his first lab-based experience in that early period of research, an experience which was complex and challenging, while also speaking about his second, more well-supported journey accompanied by his brother a few years later. We talk about Paul's early experiences with spirituality and curiosity amid World War II, and about how his medical studies allowed him to pursue his curiosity about the transpersonal, affording him opportunity to explore the liminal spaces between materiality and spirituality throughout his career and as he moved to Canada. It is a wide-ranging conversation and a snapshot into so much of what I admire about Paul: his deep commitment to embracing the complexity and transpersonal nature of non-ordinary states of consciousness, while also celebrating the mystery and synchronicities that permeate his own personal explorations. It was a pleasure being in conversation together, and it's a gift to hear him share some of his experiences during those early days of Western psychedelic research, and perhaps most importantly, hearing about how he was so personally and professionally impacted by this unfolding. A reminder that this episode contains mentions of suicidal thoughts. This warning is meant to empower you with the knowledge you need to make healthy decisions about how and if you should consume this podcast content. I invite you to practice self-care and do what feels right for you. And if you need support, please connect with someone who can help: family and friends, professionals, or a crisis line. There are both Canadian and international recommendations in the show notes below. You are not alone, not in your pain, nor in your healing. And with that, let's hear more about Paul's psychedelic roots. Welcome, Paul. It's great to have you here.
So lovely to reconnect. I'm so glad you invited me, because I really feel grateful to you for what you're doing in Eastern Ontario for people, to help them with what is very critical, and that's really the way of integrating the sessions.
Oh, that's really kind, Paul.
And I'm convinced that, when you work with psychedelics, usually 95%, it's really psychological work with very, very powerful tool. But it's really the connection with the person, what comes out and how it's dealt with. So from that angle, what you're doing is open, is wonderful. And I really appreciate it.
That's really kind, Paul.
It's important. It's very important to keep it going, because we are really at the beginning of using properly psychedelics. They are finally becoming out in the open, and much will depend how good education and integration will take place.
Yes. And perhaps that's a nice segue to learn a little bit about you and your impact, your role, your contributions to the education of this emerging psychedelic renaissance. As we move into hearing about what led you to come into the psychedelic space, what do you think it's important that people know about your background and life today?
It should be short. So I'm a Canadian research psychiatrist and clinician involved also in transpersonal activities. I was professor at several Canadian and European universities over a few decades, I think about 65 years,
Mhm.
until I retired from the University of Toronto a couple of years ago. And because at a certain point, I would have loved to go on, but it becomes so difficult to keep the license. So
Mhm.
I'm only continuing with, well, license is not needed, which is research and education. I have been involved in transpersonal activities for over 6 decades. I utilized holotropic breathwork and psychedelic supported psychotherapy with clients suffering mainly from severe mood disorders.
Mhm.
But I worked also with meditators and did some studies, particularly holotropic breathwork with psychiatric residents. Would have liked to use psychedelics, but of course that would not have worked
Mhm.
legally. In addition to my therapeutic and research work, I was also involved at the National Institute of Mental Health in Washington, in the United States,
Mhm.
and as an expert with the World Health Organization from 1985 to 2000, where I chaired the Committee on Psychotropic Substances. So that's what I said, approximately.
Mhm.
If for a talk or publication, people want to know and are interested in the psychotherapeutic and
Yeah.
transpersonal domain.
Yes. Well, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for all of the work that you've done.
It's never been work. It's always been something I was fascinated in, and they even paid me for it.
That's the dream, huh?
Yeah, and I have lived that dream, definitely.
So maybe we can go back to learn a bit about what led you to all of those accomplishments and contributions. If we were to trace a thread from all of these accomplishments and all of your engagement in the transpersonal and psychedelic space, where might that thread begin?
Well, if you asked me the same question at different ages,
Yes.
it would have changed. I see it differently now from the way I would have seen it 30 years ago. Now, I think the roots are really in group session we had with Jack Schwartz about 35 years ago
Mhm.
in Kansas. Jack was an interesting spiritual teacher
Mm.
and minister, church minister.
Mhm.
And he arranged for us a meditation on empty space. I was coming to the earth. I was just a light. I was just a small piece of light, but it was me. And
Mm.
I had to be at my mother's and father's at a particular time and they were making love. And
Mhm.
it was an amazing feeling that this is one of the most powerful cosmic laws that you have to arrive at a spot that you probably even participated in churching. So I, I see now that as an origin that then started expanding in different ways.
Wow. That's the deepest of roots. in a lot of ways. And so special that you had that experience
while meditating on
while meditating.
void.
And so what felt true to you when you were a child with those beginnings?
Well, I spent years searching for the right spiritual background, right? So I went from one religion to another religion, and not only
As a child.
yeah, and of course, then later as an adult, when I was on this side of the Atlantic, I was exploring those that were available here, but it took a while.
What was the religion in your household when you were growing up?
Well, it's interesting. Mother and father decided that we have to decide ourselves, so they did not.
Huh.
We did not have any religion. Mother was Catholic, but I would say she really practiced some non-denominational religion, just using Catholicism as a root.
Yes.
She tried me at one point. I was probably 5 years old, but for some reason, because of the Germans and other things, the Czechs pushed us into school early, and so she convinced the minister, the teacher, to take me into the class without having been christened and everything. And it did not last too long. I started asking too many questions, and he said, out. Mother was crying for a while, but then I went through, different evangelic, Jewish, whatever was available then. After the war, we had access to Mormons, and I enjoyed that, but it just did not give me the right source. And so when the communists were kicked out, I was able to go back. I went back to the same Catholic church for a sitting, and I realized that it was all there. I was just not listening from the right spot. It was all me.
That's a very interesting experience.
Yeah, realizing what I was looking was in all religions, in the mystical part. But I had to open the right spot in me to hear it.
I'm curious, Paul. Yeah, I know you grew up in what is now the Czech Republic. There's a lot of beauty and nature and forests. I'm curious what your relationship was to nature as a child. Or maybe you didn't have much of one. I'm not sure.
Oh, no. We had one, particularly forests. My mother inherited a forest out of the park, and we loved going out on weekends into different forests and some rocky areas.
Was nature part of your spirituality or part of your exploration as a kid when you were checking out all these different religions and being kicked out of some of them?
Well, I was very much involved with nature, but not with the spiritual depth that I developed, let's say, after the experiences with ayahuasca, for example. I realized the spirits in everywhere, including the trees, well, any parts of either animals or other phenomena coming from the nature, are connected. How it comes from the same source as we are. So that I didn't have. Picking up mushrooms was a great hobby at that time, and was a very good source of food at that time.
Yes. I'm interested, you circled back to Catholicism and you felt different and were able to connect with the messages of it in ways that you weren't able to when you
Yes,
were younger. How would you define that part of you that was available, that wasn't available earlier? And again, this
connection,
Mhm.
connection with my mystical center.
What changed from when you were younger to when you came back to it that
I think it
allowed you to
was.
access that?
I think it was number one, meditating regularly. Number two, reading various spiritual masters. And number three, going through the different religions, particularly practicing with Muslims for a couple of years, that showed me that the desire comes from the same place.
Yes. Did you grow up in an environment where drugs were ever discussed or
In 1950s, 40s, 30s, no.
not so much? No. And so, I guess one other question about your childhood before we transition into the psychedelic space where drugs did become part of your
Yes,
consciousness.
yeah.
I guess 2 more questions. One, I'm curious about how the war may or may not and growing up around violence and with that kind of lived experience, do you think that that had an impact on how your life unfolded and your move towards some of this work?
I never quite thought about that.
Hmm.
Mm, it probably is a connection, but I don't see it.
Mhm.
You
It
know, of
sound
course, at that time I was hating Nazis for the huge pain that they were creating. You know, there were years where every day by the public announcement they were announcing who they killed, which Czech they
Mm.
killed. I've seen some pretty horrible scenes. You know, I certainly see communists certainly had a determined point in pushing me out, but uh, so that I eventually could use psychedelics on the West. But that's about all that comes to mind. I'll think about it, but
Hmm.
at the moment,
Yeah. It sounds like your childhood was a mixture of looking for truth, maybe finding it sometimes here and there, and navigating a lot of different contexts,
yeah,
socially as well as within your family. How did you move from this context of childhood to start moving towards science and your academic work and moving towards your psychedelic work?
yeah. And I have to say that we were very fortunate. Our parents were absolutely wonderful.
Mm.
They supported us without directing us in any, just backing us in whatever we wanted to explore. Now, I mentioned the uh, story of coming to the earth before conception. And so you won't be surprised that what I always wanted before I came to psychedelics, I never thought of medicine or psychedelics. I wanted to build, I wanted to be an engineer who will focus
Ah,
fully on traveling in the space to other
mhm,
planets,
mhm.
something that now makes sense, but at the time there's nothing like that existed. So that was a, and then around 14, I became fascinated by Freud. Freud's right. He was, despite the limitations in his interpretations, he was he was a very good writer.
Mm.
Very nicely tried to explain human problems in kind of cause and effect, which of course it's not. It's much more interesting. But when you read it, that fascinated me, and so I started practicing in child psychiatry for a period of time, and then of course eventually went to medical school and became physician.
When did psychedelics start to come into your consciousness? Because this is in the 50s, 60s sort
Yeah,
of time
yeah.
when all of these substances are coming into the scene. When did you first hear about them?
Around 1955, 56, Albert Hoffman managed to convince Sandoz that it should be explored. They said maybe there has some value in medicine. Maybe it has a value that the psychiatrists and nurses can have some experience what their patients experience. Who knows? There's a bunch of psychiatrists who could figure this out, and so we'll send them. So
Hmm.
my my first my first session was in the Institute of Nutrition. There was Professor Wojciechowski, good friend, and he was studying the effect of LSD on acids and on free acids, and particularly looking at lipids, how they were influenced. So my experience was I got a huge plate of whipped cream, and there was first supply. I think it was about 150 micrograms of LSD, and of course, well, the whipped cream only became available, I think, 1950. Up to that point, it was just a shortage. So the first 3 spoons were wonderful. But finishing the full plate was quite an experience. I did not have any real support. There was somebody sitting but no preparation. It's not known. Not known.
Did you know that you were taking LSD?
Oh yes, yeah. I was. I learned about the effects, and so I was told this was the only opportunity at that time,
Hmm.
and so I used it. And
What about what you were reading or what you were learning about the effects that made you want to experience it?
um, well, I was curious. I was curious about the colors. I was curious about the kaleidoscopic images. I was very interested about the visual part that I heard about. And of course, at that time we knew about mescaline from Huxley.
Mhm,
So it was curiosity
mhm,
and assumption that we're going to start and investigating.
hmm.
But you had to be either essentially to have access to some experimentation. You had to be graduated physician, or you would be able to get into some other experiments as a volunteer. So this was one of them.
So you showed up to the lab and they gave you a plate full of whipped cream
Yeah.
laced with LSD, and the
And
first 3 bites were great, and then
much of the experience was tied up with how the hell I'm going to finish this play. And Miloš, the Professor Wojciechowski, had some support there, and so he would come in and ask. And eventually, when we had the feeling that maybe 7 hours later, 8 hours later, that everything is fine, he would take me home.
Hmm. So what was the come up like for you as your
Yeah.
first experience of a non-ordinary state of consciousness?
Well, the most powerful ending was at home.
Oh,
We thought it was finished, but I came home and suddenly there was this other wave came, and I became acutely suicidal. What was happening in my head, I just felt I could not stand. That there was such mishmash, such something that I could not understand, and it was intolerable how the thoughts and visions were going through me. And I went to the window and I imagined, we were on the 3rd floor, fairly high. I was looking at the at the road where there was big cobblestones. And I thought, if I jump it and break my head, this is going to be such a relief.
Mm.
So I went into one of the yoga position with my knees behind my head and just stayed in that position and tried to stay so that I could not move. And eventually, probably after half an hour, it stopped.
Mm.
So that was my first one.
Wow. Do you mind if I ask a few questions
Yeah,
about it?
sure. Oh, no, absolutely. I really have very little. Yes, I remember some of the kaleidoscopic experiences, but a lot of effort went into eating this plate.
That's the main thing you remember in the come up. So it sounds like when you got home, you had a very distinct and acute experience that was really painful and scary.
Yeah,
What was it like in the lab? And what kind of experience did you have there?
just kaleidoscopic visions,
Hmm.
and it was really overlaps by by struggling with the plate.
You know, we talk a lot in this field about set and setting. And I'm really interested in hearing about this experience of in the lab and with the plate of whipped cream and sort of that being one particular experience, and then you moving to your home and having a very distinct and very different experience.
Yeah.
What do you think was different for you?
Well, there was really the whole idea of set and setting came about a decade later.
Exactly, yes. But you
So
got to experience it firsthand.
yes, yeah. If I have to look at the experience, I you know became later at least aware of astrology, and there was Saturn very much in the orbit at that time, which I have very much in my birth chart. So that could have been a factor, but I had no knowledge of it at that time.
So you had this very acute suicidal experience,
Yeah.
and you moved into this yoga position that felt supportive, and eventually things started to resolve and you started to come down from the experience. How
Yes.
was the come down and how was the day or 2 after that experience? Because that sounds quite intense.
I I was in the medical school at that time, and that was the third year. That was very busy. There were topics like pathological anatomy where you had to memorize 3,000 pages. So I think
Oof.
it went very quickly into focusing back on the medical school.
Do you feel like you had a chance to process or integrate that experience, or did it feel like its own sort of distinct experience?
More like a distinct experience. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Actually,
Hmm.
well, as you will see, the second session, which I had supported and I had preparation about a year. No, that would be quite a few years later, about
Hmm.
4 or 5 years. But it had similar features in it.
Well, maybe we can talk about so what I'm hearing you say, or what it sounds like is this was your first experience, but you
Tripping,
didn't have a lot
tripping.
of yeah, your first trip,
Yes,
but you didn't have a lot of support going into it, and you didn't have the opportunity to do a lot of processing after it. And so
because if that those issues were not aware at
yeah,
that time. The, the idea was, let's measure the fatty acids. What does the LSD do?
wow.
We didn't know. It was
Mhm.
yeah.
And so it sounds like you have a different experience that you might consider your second first experience.
Yes. Yeah. That actually took place at, I think, 61.
Mhm.
And at that time, we already knew that psychedelics and LSD can have very profound therapeutic effect, even in the conditions where the traditional treatment doesn't help. So we followed kind of psychoanalytic approach in that to be able as a physician to use LSD therapeutically, you had to have first 5 sessions of your own, like, like you do with psychoanalysis, you have to be psychoanalyzed first. So you have to be psychedelicized first. So 5 sessions in supervision, and then I've worked with 30 patients under supervision. So the next one was my first session of these 5. And it was very busy year, so we went to a psychopharmacological conference up in the mountains, and so I had a session there, and my brother supervised me, prepared me for that.
That's very interesting.
I actually never thought about it, but it had some connection with the first session, in that my first experience was I was back in the cellars when there were attacks by planes on Prague. You would run down and hide in the cellar. Of course, it was kind of old cellar with strange smell, of course.
Yes.
Strange feeling, and the fear that this may be it if it hits our home. And I had an amazing experience of, I found myself suddenly in this huge Indian temple, and then eventually Kali came with, the hands kind of coming down with the blood dripping from every finger, and the feeling of death was just all in the air. And that was very much the characteristic of the first session. Now it had some interesting follow-up, which showed how little I know about how to properly set up session where you give yourself at least 2 or 3 days and you can integrate it. Because next morning I was scheduled for a talk where I was working on for my PhD, which was kind of mathematical models, how to study more effectively the efficacy of new psychotropic drugs. And I walked into that room. There was a large room and large audience, about 300 people. And there was a beautiful, absolutely beautiful crystal glass. What's the word?
Like a chandelier?
Chandelier. Thank you. Chandelier. Amazing, the light that was coming from each piece. So, what the fuck? I mean, who cares about some lecture? How would that look? So eventually people realized that I was not quite able to put the mathematical explanations, and stopped in the middle. But it was certainly a fascinating session.
I bet. Do you mind if I ask a few questions about
Yeah.
that second
No.
experience? Just to contrast it to the
Yeah.
first one. So you said that in the second one, it sounds like you didn't have a ton of integration time, but you did have some preparation time.
Yeah.
How did you prepare? So you had some psychotherapeutic sessions to sort
Yeah.
of prepare for them. What helped you feel prepared to go into the second journey?
Well, knowing that from non-early states of consciousness, from the field, anything can come. And, my brother Stan was with me. I felt, this time I felt fully supported and comfortable going into the experience.
I imagine that would have made a big difference.
Yeah, huge difference.
What was the come up like? So you didn't have a big giant bowl of whipped cream this time to distract you.
Yeah.
What did that come up feel in a more safe and supported and prepared
Well,
sense?
despite the Kali really playing the major role, I came on very, very positive and positive that I appreciated beauty much more than anything else in the world.
Mm.
I then walked out from the lecture, walked out in the mountains. It was January. It was beautiful, beautiful ice, beautiful sky. Oh, God, wasn't that beautiful? Yeah, the outcome was wonderful because of beauty that I saw.
Yeah. Did you interact with Kali at all in that journey, or was it more observing her?
Just observing.
Observing.
I must say,
Mm.
I clearly it was an experience from my childhood that came up, from the 1940s. That was very clear, but I was not expecting Indian symbology coming into my LSD session. Although I should have, because Stan and I, we studied Sanskrit for 4 years in the Oriental Institute, so it should not have been surprised. But I expected some replay of memories from some misbehaving when I was 2 or 3 years, something like that. Not Kali. What I have in my mind, what I have with archetypal phenomena.
Yes. I'm interested in that first experience where this fear came up and it didn't feel like you could experience it and you just wanted it to end. And then you didn't have a lot of integration or processing afterwards. I'm interested in the second experience. You saw Kali, you saw death, you saw the destruction. And then in this period afterwards, there was such beauty. I'm curious what connections, if any, you see in that interaction with Kali and the beauty that you experienced afterwards, whether it was the chandelier, whether it was the snow and ice in the mountains. I don't know. And maybe there is no connection. I'm just wondering if you
Well,
see
the
it.
main thing I saw in connection with the previous 4 years of Sanskrit, that I have a deep inside some connection with Indian past and in Indian mythology. And when we eventually managed to go to India, I could certainly see it when I had some long meditative sessions in the temples, how strong it is in me.
Uh-huh.
And I often have, whether we do meditations or whether we do some healing intention sessions, some Indian symbology expressions come quite often.
Mm.
And I had some, whatever that means, I had some past life experiences very much tied up to Ganges, and feeling that this part of my consciousness that's connected. You can say past life, but I would say just piece of past consciousness connected with me in some field.
Yes.
I should say one thing, almost, this is over 70 years ago, some of the things, and I had so many very powerful experiences since that I don't have very detailed as I would have from sessions
Of
here.
course.
But one fascinating thing is, and that really puzzles me, and that would be around 1990, early 1990. I went to workshop, just crossed into the United States, went to Vermont, and there was one Swami running sessions. So we had session where all of us were sitting around him, eyes closed. He started coming to me with his feather. He just wanted to give me some Shaktipat, I guess. So he put his thumbs into my eyes a bit and used the feather. And I completely, in full detail, relived that session.
Wow.
With the second session, the session with Kali in the basement. And he had no idea about that. This is the last thing I would have expected. How well stored these things are in our field of consciousness, I guess forever.
Yes. How did it feel to relive that experience so many years later?
Puzzling, shocking,
Yes.
fascinating.
Did you also experience the beauty that came?
No, the beauty was really second day. I had the session in the evening and the lecture next morning, and the whole beauty was there. No, it was really an experience with Kali.
Mhm.
And I read later that he had some particular connection with Kali, among other things in the Indian mythology, but that Kali was important. Both the positive and the death-related negative aspects.
Yes. Again, we talked a bit about the preparation and how much safer and supported you felt in that second experience. It sounds like you also got to experience beauty. Have you experienced that beauty at other times in your life or
Oh,
after other experiences? Was that the first time?
absolutely. Sometimes the sessions were only experiencing beauty. Particularly, I was getting on the way into eternity, and if I got into eternity, snow, space, and time, there was incredible beauty sometimes.
I'm so glad that that experience of beauty has also stayed with you, both the shadow and the light.
Yes,
Kali shows up and also the beauty shows up in lots of different places in unexpected ways. It's really beautiful.
it is. I must admit.
Mm. I'm curious, as we begin to wrap up our conversation a little bit, Paul, we often talk about a calling in a spiritual or creative sense. Do you feel like psychedelics called to you in some way, or perhaps the universe called in some way? I'm not sure.
Um, I wish I could see it in a way that kind of corresponds to Newton's way of the way we've been thinking for 100 years, cause, effect.
Mhm.
I am at the point where I feel that this is interaction. The universe called for me, and I called for it.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
an interplay. It's very much interplay.
Mhm.
Many of these things are more complex than we generally see it, and we are at the beginning of investigating consciousness and non-ordinary consciousness. I think we will know much better in 30, 40 years. And I think we'll move more to understanding the beautiful interplay of these things rather than this called this called that.
I agree. On that note, perhaps, what are some of the most important lessons that you've learned from your explorations or your studies with psychedelics? Or maybe that's too big a question.
Well, it's been, I worked with psychedelics for different reasons, of course, for therapy of others, but also for my own resolution, some of the issues from the past. But it also has been a huge spiritual, religious, if you want, and transpersonal change. I think, and again, I wouldn't say it changed my view of life. It certainly played a huge role in the way I see the life. One of the greatest inspirations is probably the understanding that this debate about, is it all spiritual that creates the matter, or is it all matter that creates the spiritual? Is It's a wrong question.
Mm.
It's one connection. Material can change into spiritual, and spiritual can change materially. It's not simple, but
Mhm.
but that's the way I perceive it now. Uh, that's how it works. It gave me understanding of what the purpose of life is. And again, it's not simple. We participate, and our guides, I think, participate in planning it. And then during our life here, we are trying to find out what it is for us. Uh, that's why so many philosophies have very different explanations, because it relates to individual person and individual philosopher, of course. There's so much. There's so much that I feel I've learned.
Have you figured out what your purpose is?
Yeah, I think so. I think that mm, studying medicine was doing two things: helping physically people, but also give me respectability that I can teach transpersonal issues to academics that normally would not take it, because
Mm.
they see me. I'll talk about reincarnation and so, this is this lithium guy who talks about it. That's okay. So the bridge, I think, my purpose is by and large, I think, some bridging, taking it from the spiritual transpersonal. I've been extremely fortunate with what I have been doing and learning about mood disorders and then consciousness. And so because of that, I'm just working on a completely new explanation of major mood disorders, where the brain certainly is only kind of a transducer of consciousness, but makes big role into when you experience some changes, how strong they're gonna be, and so on. But the actual experience comes to us from the field of consciousness, but it needs to come to the brain for us to experience it. And it's the oscillatory processes in the brain that then determine when and how and what you experience, and probably the archetypal influences as well. It's been gradual learning. It's not just one thing that I've learned, but psychedelics have been huge, huge support. You can get to the same ideas with holotropic breathwork any other way.
Yes.
Hypnosis, if you do it the right way, you can get into non-ordinary states of consciousness. Psychedelics is a bit of a kind of a royal way to get there.
Yes. I love how you sit between the material and the spiritual. And I love how that has been a theme throughout your life. Even as a kid, insisting on the spiritual and being curious about it and wanting it to make sense. I think about that first experience where they were looking at LSD specifically around lipids without any attention to the phenomenological or the experiential and how dissonant an experience you had because of it.
Yeah.
I love that you're playing the role of a bridge. And I love,
Trying.
yeah, thank you for playing that role and for bringing that passion and that vision into this very complex, very nuanced, very exciting space and encouraging us to think about it complexly and transpersonally. It's a real gift. Mm. Thank you, Paul, so much for the
Well,
conversation.
thank you. You're giving so much to people who experience psychedelics and provide what they badly need to benefit. It's not the drugs, it's the psychological process that utilizes the drug that's beneficial. And I think you're stressing that very clearly.
Well, thank you. And thank you for all the work that you do. It's a real pleasure to hear about your route. And thank you so much for sharing your story about those early experiences, particularly not just in the early unfolding of your own engagement with psychedelics, but also the early engagement with Western culture. You know, there's a parallel that's really beautiful. And I really appreciate you sharing it.
Yeah. And I hope you see very clearly how it's not easy to create 70 years story in a very simple way.
No, it was wonderful. Thank you so much, Paul. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hope to see you soon again.